That night, everything seemed normal. I was alone at home, like many other times, since my parents had traveled to visit my grandmother. The house's ground floor, simple, without stairs, so any noise coming from above simply didn't make sense. I was on the couch, watching series with low sound because of the rain outside, when I clearly heard a dry cough. It wasn't a TV noise. It was a real cough, muffled, as if it had come from a room just above me, which doesn't exist. I shot on the spot. I was completely still for a few seconds, just trying to understand what I had heard. At first, I thought it was something from the street. Sometimes the sound of rain deceives, echoes through the corners. But the detail is that the cough seemed too close, and there was no way to come from the street because the windows were all closed, and the front gate too. I got up slowly, went to the front door, and checked if there was anyone outside. I came back and stood in the middle of the room, in silence, just waiting to see if I heard again. And I heard. A second cough, this time shorter, and it seemed even closer. My heart started beating faster. I lived there for years, and I knew exactly how every corner of the house sounded. That wasn't a pipe, it wasn't wind, and it certainly wasn't my head playing tricks. I took my cell phone and turned on the flashlight, although all the lights in the house were working. It was more for the feeling of control, you know. I walked slowly through the rooms, trying to track where exactly the sound had come from. Every step I took on the tile floor seemed to echo more than usual, as if silence was forced, waiting for something to happen. When I arrived at the door of my parents' room, which is at the back of the house, I had the impression of hearing a creaking, as if someone had stepped in there. The door was ajar. I always leave her like this, but at that moment that seemed wrong to me, as if it had been purposely placed that way so that I couldn't see it right. I approached, with the flashlight shaking a little in my hand, and pushed the door with my foot. The room was empty, but there was a detail that froze me to the bone. The ceiling fan was spinning slowly, even off. It wasn't plugged in, and even so it turned. At that moment, I felt a chill rising from the back of my neck, as if there was someone behind me. I turned around at the time, but I didn't see anything. But the air seemed different, heavier, dense. I went to the living room to try to calm down, thinking about calling someone, but I was embarrassed. What was I going to say? I heard a cough and the fan turned by itself. It was going to look crazy. I sat on the couch, took a deep breath, and began to rationalize. Maybe the noise came from the street. Maybe the fan turned because of the wind of some open slet. But none of this made much sense. The house was all closed because of the cold and the cough that had been too close. Then came the part that scared me the most. While I was still sitting, trying not to freak out, I heard it again. A cough. But this time, it was in the kitchen. And it was different. It looked shorter, as if someone was trying to muffle it. I got up with everything, took a screwdriver that was in the bookshelf drawer, and walked slowly, with my legs a little loose. The kitchen is right there, next to the living room, so it was enough to turn the corridor. But before I even got there, I saw a shadow moving against the wall, as if someone had passed very slowly in front of the refrigerator light. The detail? The refrigerator's light only turns on when it's open. When I saw that shadow passing through the light of the refrigerator, my body just crashed. I stood still in the hallway, holding the screwdriver so hard that my hand began to sweat. I waited a few seconds, trying to hear anything that confirmed what I thought I had seen. But everything was silent. Really silence, absolute. The kind of silence that makes you realize the sound of your own breathing. I approached slowly until I reached the kitchen door. Everything was off, only with that weak blue glow of the refrigerator light illuminating part of the floor. And that's when I saw the refrigerator door was completely open, and nothing else. The first thing I did was run to her and close it. There was nothing outside the place, but the floor had marks, as if someone had stepped wet and left marks going from the kitchen towards the corridor that led to my room. It wasn't possible. I was sure that the house was locked, all the doors and windows. I ran to the front door to check the lock, intact. I ran back, and as I passed through the living room again, I noticed something that made me cold. The light key in my room was on. I left them all erased when I went to watch TV. That made me sure there was someone in there with me. I thought about running out of the house, but the rain was falling so hard that I could barely see the backyard. My cell phone still had no signal, and, at that time, I was afraid to turn my back and leave whatever was in there free to move. So I took a deep breath, took my cell phone just to use the flashlight, and walked slowly to the room. With every step I took, my heart beat faster. When I got to the door, I stopped for about 5 seconds trying to create courage. The doorknob was cold, and I had to hold it tight so as not to let my hand tremble. I pushed the door slowly, and there was no one. Absolutely no one. But there was something wrong. The curtains were shrugged, as if they had been pulled. The window was locked, but it was as if someone had tried to open it and gave up. And on the floor, right in the corner near the bed, there was a wet mark similar to the sole of a foot. Only one. I didn't know what else to think. I started walking around the house again, checking every room, every door, every closet, but everything remained exactly the same. It was only when I returned to the living room and sat on the couch that I realized something else that made me completely freeze. The screwdriver that I had left on my side. It was no longer there. At that time I jumped up, looking around as if I expected to see someone staring at me from some corner of the room. I was absolutely sure that I had left that screwdriver on the table next to the sofa. I started to wonder if I could have saved it myself without realizing it, but I was so tense that every thought seemed confusing. I went to the kitchen, opened the tool drawer, and there it was, as if someone had put it back in place. And it wasn't me. I haven't left the living room from the moment I sat on the couch after looking at the room. That moved me in a way that's hard to explain. The feeling of being watched began to grow in me like a constant pressure. I kept walking around the house trying to think of rational explanations, trying to convince myself that maybe I was tired, stressed. But all I wanted was to get out of there. I took the car key, but then I remembered. The garage was locked inside, with the key hanging on the laundry wall. When I went there, I had another that the laundry door was ajar, and the light, which I was sure was off, was now on. At that point, I could no longer pretend that I was imagining something. The hand even trembled when I pushed the laundry door. Inside, everything looked in place, until I saw what was on the floor. It had a footprint. Unique, wet, right in the middle of the white tiles. Just one. As if someone had entered there coming from outside, but hadn't left. I went straight to the garage key, took it off the hook, and ran to the car. I wanted to get out of that house as soon as possible. I turned on the engine still with the garage door open, and only stopped driving when I got about 2 blocks away. I parked near a 24-hour market and stayed inside, walking through the corridors until dawn. The next day I went home with my brother. He entered first, and of course, everything seemed normal. Nothing out of place. Missing footprints, lights off, locked doors. The entrance camera didn't catch anyone, but me going in and out. I couldn't sleep for days. To this day I don't know if I got into an outbreak, if someone had access to the house, or if it was something else. But that cough, that first cough, it doesn't leave my head. She wasn't mine. I can guarantee that. And you? Have you ever been through something like this inside your own house? That night I was alone at home. My girlfriend had gone to visit her sister, and I took the opportunity to do what everyone does when it's cool. I ordered a pizza, put on a movie, and I was left on the couch. Everything was quiet, only that thin rain hitting the windows. When the delivery man arrived, I took the box at the door, thanked him quickly because I hate talking at these times, and went back to the couch. I closed the door, locked it, as I always do, and threw the key on the table. Nothing out of the ordinary. At least until about 10 minutes later, when my cell phone vibrated again with a notification from the front door's motion camera. At the time I thought it was application delay, or maybe the reflection of the rain confusing the sensor. But out of curiosity, I opened the notification and played the recording. The video showed exactly the same framing as before, but with one difference: the doorknob moves. Not like it's the wind, she turns. You can clearly see the smooth movement, as if someone was trying to open it slowly. But the strangest thing is that no one appears in front of the camera. Just the handle moving by itself. I paused, zoomed, tried to adjust the brightness. Nothing. No shadow, no figure, no hand. Just that muffled sound of the rain and the handle moving. My stomach turned on the spot. I got up slowly and went to the door, even with my heart beating fast. I looked through the peephole, but of course there was no one. Still, I stood there, trying to hear any different sound. The street was empty, only the noise of the fine rain and the wind. I went back to the couch, a little restless, trying to convince myself that it was just a camera error, maybe some problem with the sensor. But then came another notification. This time, the caption said detected movement, internal corridor. My blood frosted. I only have one camera inside the house, in the corridor that connects the living room to the bedrooms. It was installed because my dog stayed there a lot when I wasn't at home. But he wasn't with me that night, and I hadn't left any light on there. I opened the recording trembling. The image appeared a little dark, only illuminated by the light of the TV in the living room that reflected at the end of the corridor. For a few seconds, nothing happened. But then, very slowly, a shadow crossed from one side to the other. It wasn't big nor small. It was the size of an ordinary person, and the shape was very reminiscent of someone walking with their shoulders slightly bent forward. But what terrified me the most was the fact that the movement seemed conscious, as if that thing knew it had a camera there and was trying to move out of its reach. I paused the video and kept looking at the screen, not knowing what to do. There was no way to pretend it was a coincidence anymore. I took my cell phone and turned on the camera's audio. I couldn't see anything else, but I left it running in real time. The silence was total, only the light sound of the rain hitting the kitchen window. The static image of the corridor showed no movement, but out of nowhere, a dry crot echoed, as if someone had stepped on a loose board. I jumped off the couch and turned off the TV, trying to hear better. 2 more muffled steps. The feeling that I wasn't alone became unbearable. I turned on all the lights in the house while trying to convince myself that it could be some problem with the wiring, or a mouse, anything. But with every step that echoed from the corridor, my mind screamed that it was not normal. I went to the front door, ready to leave the house and wait in the car until dawn, but the doorknob seemed to be stung, as if someone outside was holding her tightly. It was at that moment that the camera sensor accused another movement in the corridor. I ran to my room, locked the door and locked myself in the closet, trembling. I stayed there for I don't know how long, listening to a rhythmic noise of breathing coming from outside the room, as if someone, or something, was leaning against the door listening to me. After a while, everything stopped. When I finally took courage to leave, all the lights were off again. But the corridor camera was still recording, and what it recorded was what made me never sleep with the door unlocked again. In the video, you could clearly see that the living room door, which I had locked, opened by itself. And for a few seconds, the camera captured a dark silhouette standing there. You couldn't see a face or clothes, just a still form, completely motionless. She stayed there for more than a minute before simply disappearing from the frame. No noise, no shadow, no exit record. I don't know how it came in, or how it came out. All I know is that, since that night, I installed new locks, cameras in every room, and started sleeping with a knife under the pillow. But honestly, I never felt safe in that house again. I've already thought about moving, but I don't know if that would work. Because the worst part is that, to this day, sometimes I receive notifications of movement at the door. Always at the same time. And when I go to look, there's no one. But the camera always fails for a few seconds, as if something passed right in front of the lens. And in this short space of time, I'm completely immobile, waiting to hear that breath again. And you? Have you ever felt really alone inside your own house? Or just thought you were? That weekend, my parents had traveled to visit my grandparents in the countryside, and I was alone at home. It wasn't the first time, so I wasn't exactly nervous. In fact, I even liked the idea of having the whole house all to myself. I spent Saturday playing, ordered food, left all the lights off, only the one in the living room on, and stayed up late marathoning series on the couch. Everything is quiet, until around 2 in the morning. I remember pausing the episode because I heard a metallic sound coming from the back of the house. At the time, I thought it was some street noise or wind pushing the gate. But the noise came again. This time much clearer, the sound of a key trying to turn the back door lock. I was totally still with the control in my hand, trying to listen more carefully. The back door is far from the room, but the sound was too clear to be an illusion. And that's when something gave me an absurd chill. Only me and my parents have the key to that door. I never left copies with anyone. I got up slowly, my heart racing, and began to walk silently through the corridor, trying to hear some more sound. The only thing I knew was that someone was outside, and seemed to have the right key. I arrived in the kitchen with the light off, and approached the back door, trying not to make noise. The latch was in place, but I swear it stirred slightly just when I got close, as if someone had made one more attempt to turn the key. At the same time, I crouched behind the table and stood there, standing still, trying to think about what to do. My cell phone was in the living room. The urge to run there and call the police was great, but I was afraid of making noise, and the person outside noticed that I was awake. I was motionless for several minutes, listening. But the sound stopped. Nothing else. No steps, no key, no breathing on the other side of the door. Just the silence and my heart beating hard in my chest. After a while, when I was sure that whoever it was had left, I ran to the living room, took my cell phone and checked the cameras. The one in the back showed a dark figure standing there for a while. I couldn't see the face. The person wore a hood or cap. I couldn't identify it. But the strangest thing was her movement. She took something out of her pocket, put it in the lock, spent a few seconds trying to rotate, then put it back and simply walked away, as if nothing had happened. No hurry, no looking back. I went back to the video several times trying to understand if it was really a key or some kind of tool, but it looked like exactly the same key we use at home. That's when my fear turned into paranoia. The next morning, as soon as the sun appeared, I went straight to check the lock. There were no signs of burglary, scratches, or anything like that. Everything was normal. But that only made the situation stranger, because it confirmed that someone really tried to use a key. I called my parents, trying to stay calm, and asked, like someone who doesn't want anything, if they had lent the house key to someone. The answer was a very direct no, followed by a why. I told you what happened. My father tried to rationalize, saying that maybe it was a similar key, and my mother began to panic. They returned home early on the same day. We spent the following weeks trying to find an explanation. My father changed the door and window lock, put extra locks, and even installed more cameras. The police were called, but they said that without signs of burglary or forced attempt, there was not much to do. Sometimes I still find myself looking at the cameras, hoping to see something strange. Nothing ever happened again, but that video, that moment when someone tried to enter with the right key, still haunts me. And to this day I wonder, how did this person get a copy of my house key? And you? Have you ever experienced something that seemed impossible to explain? I've always liked playing video games at night. The silence of the house, the immersive sound of the phone, everything helps me relax after a stressful day. It was a Friday, around 11 at night, and I was alone because my parents had gone out for dinner. All the lights in the house were on. I have this kind of silly habit, but I feel safer that way. I was playing in the front room, concentrated, with the volume very high, when I felt a strange vibration in the air, as if something had changed in the atmosphere of the house. I can't explain, it was just a feeling, you know. But seconds later, a dry sound came. Something like touch, touch, touch. At first, I thought it was some noise from the game, or maybe from the street, since sometimes a car passes by with loud sound. But then I took off the phone, and I heard it again. Someone was knocking on the kitchen window. 3 quick, dry, half-impatient touches. I was stuck for a few seconds. The kitchen was in the back of the house, and you couldn't see where I was from. The strangest thing is that everything was illuminated. The whole house lit. It wasn't like the person was trying to see if there was someone she knew. Even so, he hit the window. I got up slowly and walked down the corridor, trying to make as little noise as possible. I got to the kitchen and stood for a few seconds next to the door, trying to hear anything. Everything was quiet now. The kitchen light was on, and the window led straight to the backyard. I approached slowly with my heart racing. I looked out the window and didn't see anything. But when I turned to go out, I swear by everything I heard footsteps running in the backyard. I ran back to the hallway and went straight to the living room where the external reflector switch was. I lit it. The light brightened the backyard, and that's when I saw, deep down, someone jumping the back wall and disappearing from my field of vision. I was wearing a dark sweatshirt with a hood. I couldn't see the face, but the person had definitely seen me, and ran. I went back to the kitchen shaking, trying to understand what was happening. I still had the video game controller in my hand. I dropped it on the table and went to the back door. It was locked as always. I checked the window, no marks, nothing broken. But then something made me look to the side. Outside, in the glass, there was a wet hand mark, as if someone had touched it there with the palm of their sweaty or wet hand. And that gave me a chill, because it was raining earlier that day, but it had been hours since it stopped. That brand was recent. I picked up my cell phone, still not knowing if I was calling the police or my father. But what I wanted most was to run out of there. I ended up calling my father, more by instinct than by logic. He answered on the spot, a little sleepy, and as soon as I started telling, he was silent for a while, then just said, "Call the police." Now, he knew I wasn't the type to get scared for nothing. I hung up and called 190. While I was waiting, I was checking all the doors and windows in the house. They were all locked. But what bothered me the most was the idea that that person saw all the lights on. He saw that there was someone there, and still approached the window. That gave me a horrible feeling, as if the goal wasn't to steal anything. As if he wanted me to know he was there. The police arrived in less than 10 minutes, 2 cars. They searched the backyard, the wall, to the nearby streets. They didn't find anyone. One of the policemen said that maybe it was just a curious person or a drunk neighbor confusing houses. But it didn't make sense. The person ran when he realized that I saw it, jumped the wall as if he already knew the terrain, and still left a hand mark. What made me even more panicked was when another policeman pointed out something I hadn't noticed. On the dirt near the wall, there were footprints, as if someone had stood there for a long time, observing. After the police left, I stared at that tread mark for a long time. It seemed recent. The rainwater hadn't even deformed much yet. The person probably stood there, in the dark, waiting for the right moment to approach. The kitchen window has no curtain, so if someone wanted to observe who was inside the house, that was the ideal point. This made me think, what if he was already there long before I heard the knock? What if he was watching me play video games for a while, studying the environment, waiting for some loophole? That feeling of exposure made me sick. I felt violated, as if they had invaded not only my house, but also my intimacy. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stayed up until the day dawned, with all the lights on and a kitchen knife in my hand. Any noise outside made my heart race. I was trying to rationalize. Maybe it was just an opportunist trying to get in and run away quickly. But my instinct screamed that it wasn't that. It wasn't someone looking for something to take. It was someone testing a reaction. Someone who wanted to see what would happen. I never felt completely safe in that house after that. And to this day, every time I hear something outside at night, my whole body crashes. The next day, I talked to my neighbors to find out if they had seen anything strange that night. Some commented that they had heard footsteps and noises near my house, but no one had seen anyone. This only increased the mystery, because if it was a person, she seemed very discreet, like a ghost. I also tried to check the security cameras, but what was recorded in that area showed nothing but the wind swinging the trees and the rain falling. That left me with a flea behind my ear. Did this person know exactly where to hide so as not to be filmed? How could someone get so close, do that, and disappear like that, without leaving a sign? After this episode, I changed everything. I changed the door locks, put curtains on all the windows, and installed external motion sensors with lights. But none of this erased the strange feeling that night left. It's like there's someone there, waiting for the next chance. Has something like this ever happened to any of you? Has anyone ever shown up or tried to break into the house in a way that simply can't be explained? I keep wondering if one day I'm going to find out who that stranger was, or if it's going to be like one of those mysteries that we only tell, without an answer. After all this, I went to sleep with my cell phone in my hand, always keeping an eye on the notifications of the security system. One night, close to 2 in the morning, my heart almost came out of my mouth when I heard a strange noise coming from the kitchen. I ran to the cell phone monitor and saw a shadow moving outside the window. I stood still, watching that figure disappear in the darkness of the backyard. I called the police, who arrived quickly but found nothing, only wet footprints on the grass, going towards the move behind the house. To this day, I don't know what that person wanted, nor why he chose my house on that rainy night. Sometimes, I still find myself looking out the window, wondering if I'll see that shadow again. What scares me the most is the fact that, even with all the precautions, no one really knows what's outside waiting. Have you ever been through something similar? How did they deal with that feeling of being vulnerable inside their own house? Last night, I was trying to sleep, a normal thing, when my room was completely silent, even too much. Suddenly, around 3 a.m., Alexa in the living room started talking to herself, out of nowhere. She said with that robotic voice, "Unknown detected in the corridor." I stalked it on the spot, because there was no one with me in the house. I thought it was some mistake, some system failure, but the voice continued, and soon after the corridor lights, which are always off because I don't like to sleep with light, turned on by themselves. I stood there, looking in the direction of the corridor, with my heart racing, not understanding what was happening. I tried to rationalize it, thinking it was some update or Alexa defect, but the problem is that I never leave that light on at night, much less it turns on by itself. I walked to the corridor, looking to every corner, trying to find something that justified the noise or the lights, but there was nothing. Everything was quiet, the house the same way I had left. That's when I started to feel that cold in my spine, that feeling that I wasn't alone, even without seeing anyone. Alexa didn't stop repeating the same phrase, as if she was warning something that only she could see. I stood in the hallway, looking at the shadows that the lights formed on the walls. I tried to call someone, call a friend, anything that took me out of that strange feeling, but I didn't want to call anyone in the middle of the night. The house seemed normal, but I couldn't get out of my head that Alexa's message wasn't just a bug. that moved me in a way that I can't explain properly. The silence became heavy, as if at any moment something would appear there. I decided to go back to my room, trying to ignore the fear that was starting to grow. But when I passed through the corridor, I saw a quick shadow pass through the living room door from the corner of my eye. I turned my face quickly, but there was nothing. Everything seemed empty, but my whole body was already on high alert. When I returned to the room, I unplugged Alexa. I spent the whole night with my cell phone in my hand, looking at the door, waiting for anything to happen, but nothing else happened. So far, I can't understand what happened that morning. I stood still in bed, looking at the bedroom door, unable to sleep. Every noise, every creaking of the house seemed amplified in that silent dawn. Alexa was still off, but the feeling that someone or something had been there didn't let me go. My mind kept thinking about possibilities, from invaders to some technical problem, but no explanation seemed reasonable for that. It was one of the longest and most distressing nights I've ever lived. The next day, I tried to tell some people, but most thought I was exaggerating or that it was just Alexa's mistake. But I know what I heard, and especially, I know that the corridor lights were not on by chance. To this day, when I pass through that corridor, I keep looking carefully, hoping not to find anything strange. I never left Alexa on during the night again. After that night, I began to pay more attention to the details of my house, trying to understand if there was any logical explanation. I checked Alexa's settings, looked for updates, restarted the device several times, but nothing explained what had happened. Sometimes, even with no one at home, the lights in the hallway flashed by themselves, and I got that cold in my spine. That's when I started to feel watched inside my own space, and this is something I never thought could happen to me. On another dawn, I was almost asleep when I heard a muffled noise coming from the corridor, something like slow steps. I got up slowly, trying not to make noise, and approached the door. There was nothing, just the empty corridor illuminated by that light that, for some reason, was always lit by itself. That's when I realized that that unknown detected was perhaps not something that Alexa had invented, and this left me with a constant fear that does not come out to this day. After that, I decided to install security cameras to try to capture something that justified what was happening. But in the videos, nothing out of the ordinary appeared, only the empty corridor and the flashing lights. And the worst, sometimes looking through the cell phone screen, I saw a strange reflection that I couldn't identify, as if someone was there, but when I looked in person, there was no one. That moved me too much. I started to feel a weight in my chest every time I passed near the corridor. One night, I decided to leave Alexa off to try to sleep peacefully, but around 3 a.m. she called alone and released the same warning. Unknown detected in the hallway. I was paralyzed for a few seconds, not knowing what to do. The corridor light came on again, and I realized that it was not a technical mistake. It was the moment when I understood that something really strange was happening inside my house, something I couldn't explain or control. In the following days, I tried to stay calm, but it was impossible not to think about what could be happening there. I began to pay attention to small details, such as noises that I didn't notice before, shadows that seemed to move with the light off, and that constant feeling of being watched. Alexa warned again a few times, always at the same time, and the corridor lights continued to turn on by themselves, as if someone was walking there. But there was no one. One night, I woke up with a different noise. It was a low whisper, almost inaudible, coming from the corridor. My heart raced, and I stood still, trying to understand if I was dreaming or really listening to that. Alexa was off, so it couldn't be her. The feeling of fear took over me. I got up very carefully to check, but when I got close to the corridor, the sound suddenly stopped. It was as if someone had decided to disappear before I could see. After that, I started looking at the house in a different way. He avoided going through the corridor at night, and even left a light on in the living room to try to scare away that strange feeling. But nothing worked properly. I couldn't explain how Alexa knew about that unknown. If I didn't see anything, no one came in, and the doors and windows were all locked. I kept wondering if the problem was in Alexa, in some bug, or if something strange was really happening. One morning, already almost sleepless, I woke up to the sound of Alexa talking to herself again. This time, she said something different. Movement detected behind the kitchen door. My body froze. I got up slowly and went to the door with a knife in my hand, trying not to make noise. When I opened it, there was nothing. Only a cutting silence and the smell of the night entering through the ajar window, which I hadn't opened. It was the longest night of my life. After that night, I began to suspect that maybe someone was really inside the house, hidden. I started to hear small noises that I used to ignore, such as the creaking of the floor and soft steps, but when I tried to listen properly, everything stood. I was stuck between the fear of investigating and the fear of doing nothing. I was almost on the verge of a nervous breakdown. The next day, I decided to check the security cameras I have installed outside. There was nothing out of the ordinary, just the empty street and the wind moving the trees. The feeling, however, that it was being observed did not disappear, and Alexa continued to warn about the unknown at strange times, especially in the early hours of the morning. That scared me more than anything. On the third night, I decided to leave my cell phone charging in the living room and pay attention to Alexa's notifications. Around 3:15 a.m., she said again, "Unknown detected in the corridor." I went slowly to the corridor, and like the night before, the lights were on, but there was nothing there. Just the heavy silence and a strange cold in the air. I tried not to panic, but the feeling that someone was nearby was impossible to ignore. I sat on the couch, trying to gather courage to investigate better, when I heard the noise of a door being opened up there. My children were at my parents' house. I was alone. I took my cell phone, ready to call the police, but when I looked at the stairs, nothing moved. The door closed by itself, with a thud that made my heart almost stop. I decided to go up to check the rooms, even with the fear squeezing my chest. In the hallway, the air seemed colder, and the light of the lamps flashed slightly, as if someone was messing with the circuit breaker. I opened the door to my room slowly and didn't see anything, but when I looked in the mirror for a second, I thought I saw a shadow passing behind me. I turned quickly, but I only had the emptiness. When I returned to the living room, I heard footsteps downstairs. My instinct told me to run, but I stood still, trying to understand what was happening. The steps stood right at the living room door. Alexa made a strange click and said, "Attempts confirmed." I took my cell phone and locked the living room door, waiting for what could happen next. I stood there, leaning against the door, with my cell phone in my hand, and my eyes fixed on every corner of the room. Alexa was mute now, as if nothing had happened. No noise, no step. Just the sound of my out-of-step breathing, and the rain hitting the windows. I didn't move for a long time until I had the courage to open the door slowly and search the rest of the house. Everything was the way I had left it, except the light in the hallway, which was now off. The next morning, I checked the camera recordings I installed at the entrance. At 3:05 a.m., the lens captured a figure stopped for 10 seconds right at the front door. Then it just disappeared. No motion alert, no clear image. Just that still figure in the dark, as if he were watching. Since then, every night at 3 a.m. sharp, Alexa makes a strange sound, and I keep waiting, not knowing if she will ever speak again. Have you ever heard your Alexa say something you shouldn't? This story happened on any afternoon, one of those very normal ones, you know. I was home alone, washing the dishes after lunch. It was around 3 in the afternoon, and everything was silent. You could only hear the noise of the sink water and the fine rain hitting the kitchen window. I don't usually play music or anything like that when I wash dishes, so I was totally focused there, kind of on the automatic, thinking about life. Until my cell phone vibrated on the counter. I took a look and saw that it was a message in the family group. I thought it was more of a silly figurine or chain, but what I read made me stop at the time. The message was from my sister asking, "Who is the person standing behind you?" I froze. Literally. I was paralyzed for a few seconds, looking at the cell phone screen, as if it were some kind of joke. But then I started to see other messages coming soon after. My brother-in-law said, "Is everything okay there?" My mother, who never says anything in the group, typed, "Who is that man?" The worst of all is that I hadn't made any calls. I didn't even have WhatsApp open. I hadn't called anyone. At the time, I started to feel something strange, a cold going up the spine, even with everything closed and the weather muffled because of the rain. I tried to convince myself that it was some kind of bug on the cell phone, or someone had called me by mistake, but when I went to check the messages calmly, I saw that they were talking about a video call. And the most bizarre, my sister sent a print. It was a capture of the supposed call, and there I was on my back washing the dishes exactly as I was at that moment. And behind me very close there was a standing figure, tall, dressed in something dark. The face could barely be seen, as if it were covered by a shadow. My heart raced. I dropped everything in the sink and turned back in a jump, hoping to see someone there. But there was nothing. Absolutely nothing. The kitchen was the way it always is. Door locked, window closed, no living soul but me. I went to the living room and checked all the doors and windows. Locked. I went back to the kitchen, still a little without understanding anything, and began to question my sanity. Did I accidentally leave the camera on? But how if I hadn't even made any call? And more, how had that image been captured if my cell phone wasn't even in use at that time? I started to search my own cell phone. I went straight to the call history, and there was nothing. No video calls that day. Neither exit nor received. As if that had never happened. But the print was there, in the family group, with the exact time I was in the kitchen, washing the dishes. And the most sinister thing was that you could clearly see my reflection in the window, and the silhouette standing behind me also reflected. Only in the reflection, it seemed to be even closer than in the main image. The feeling of panic began to dominate me. My hands started to sweat, my stomach turned. I just couldn't understand what was going on. I immediately called my sister, trying to stay calm, and asked what exactly she had seen. She said that, out of nowhere, a video call of mine appeared on her cell phone, but without sound. She answered thinking I wanted to show something, and watched for a few seconds until she realized that I didn't even know I was being filmed. He said that the figure appeared for only about 5 seconds, and soon after the call fell by itself. She still tried to call me back, but it turned out as if my cell phone was out of area. This made me even more terrified, because the cell phone was with me all the time, and with a normal signal. It was as if someone had managed to use my device outside, in some way that I can't explain. After that, I started walking around the house slowly, opening the doors of the rooms, checking behind furniture, looking under the bed, even inside the bathroom box I looked. I needed to make sure I was really alone. At every step, my heart seemed to beat louder than the sound of the rain outside. I caught myself holding my breath without realizing it, as if any sound could denounce me to. I don't know what. I didn't find anything, but the feeling that I was being watched didn't go away. It was as if there was something there, hidden, analyzing me, waiting for me to lower my guard. I even thought maybe I was freaking out, but that image in the family group was not an invention of my head. I decided to reset the phone, and then I activated the front camera to see if someone could be spying or something like that. There was no strange application running, nothing abnormal technically speaking, but the camera screen was for a few seconds with a slight delay, as if the image was being processed by something else before appearing there. It gave me goosebumps to my spine. It was fast, but enough for me to turn off the camera and throw the cell phone on the couch. It was as if the whole house had changed after that. The sounds became more evident, each creaking of the floor, each rain blow against the window seemed to carry a different weight. It was impossible to relax. After a while trying to distract myself, I sat on the couch with the TV on, but without paying attention to anything. I had my cell phone in my hand, staring at that message in the family group, as if looking for some explanation between the words. I thought about asking more, but I was afraid of seeming paranoid, or worse, finding out something I wasn't ready to know. The group has been silent since then, as if no one wanted to touch on the subject anymore. That's when I received a new notification. Missed call, video, family group. It was from minutes ago, and I swear I didn't make any call. That paralyzed me for a few seconds. I entered the history, and there it was, an attempt to call from my number. I ran through the settings and, on impulse, changed all the passwords, deleted apps that I no longer used, and turned off the Wi-Fi. But the biggest fear was not that someone was hacking me. The fear was what that figure behind me represented. Who was it? Why did you show up just at that time? Was it still here, and I just couldn't see? I started to feel like I had opened a door that I shouldn't have. And maybe it couldn't be more to close. That night, I slept with all the lights on and the door locked with a chair leaning, as if that would protect me from something I can't even explain. I spent the week paranoid, looking at the corners, reviewing cameras of the building. I even considered installing a camera inside the house, but at the same time I was afraid of what I could see. Since then, nothing else has happened. No strange calls, no messages, no signals. And maybe that's the most disturbing, because everything was silent, as if that presence had only come to be seen, and then simply disappeared. To this day, when I remember this, I feel a chill that I can't describe. I try to rationalize, think of system failure, someone invading my account, anything. But deep down I know it wasn't that. I saw the reflection on the glass, my family saw it on the call. That was here with me. And what scares me the most is not knowing why. There was never any explanation again. Only this emptiness remained, and the feeling that, at some point, this can happen again. And if it happens, I don't know if I'll have the courage to look back again. And you, Have you ever seen something strange in reflections or video calls? Answer here in the comments. I've never been a fearful person. I always thought my apartment was the safest place in the world, and my dog, Thor, was always quiet. One of those who only barks when he hears the bell or when he wants to play. But that night, something changed. I was watching TV in the living room. It was already close to 11 when I realized that Thor was weird. He got up out of nowhere and stared at the corridor. It didn't bark. I just growled low, continuous, as if I was seeing something there, and that was enough to freeze my spine. I got up to see what he was facing. The hallway had the light off, but I saw that he was looking straight at the built-in closet that is there, next to the guest room. I went there with him glued to my leg. When I turned on the light, I realized that one of the closet doors was ajar. Not much, just enough to make that pitch from the interior visible. I approached slowly and, without even touching the door yet, I noticed something strange on the floor, marks. Like footprints of clay drying on the white floor. Those marks went from the closet to the middle of the corridor. The problem? It hadn't rained that day. Not even in the previous ones. And no one had entered with dirty shoes here at home. At the time, my heart started beating faster. I tried to find some logical explanation. Maybe Thor had knocked something out of the closet and dragged it without me seeing it? Maybe those marks were older, and I just hadn't noticed before? But the truth is that nothing made sense. I had cleaned that corridor the day before. I remember well because I rubbed it right there, and there was no mark. And the closet, it's almost never used. I only keep some old stuff, paper boxes, and some things I don't even remember anymore. I approached slowly, and Thor stayed behind, stopping on the living room carpet. That's when I knew there was something really wrong. He never let me go anywhere alone. I got very close to the ajar door. The smell there seemed a little different, kind of wet, like wet earth. I pointed the cell phone flashlight into the closet, a little afraid, and I didn't see anything right away. Only stacked boxes and some coats hanging. But when I lowered the light a little, I saw that one of the boxes was half open with the lid down. It looked like it had been stirred. I couldn't even decide whether to open more or if I just left everything as it was. That feeling that there was something, or someone, there with me kept bothering me all the time. And the worst, Thor kept growling, without leaving his place. I decided that I couldn't stand there just waiting. I picked up the phone and called my mother, who lives nearby. I wanted someone with me, even if it was only by phone, because at that moment it seemed that the silence of the house was getting too heavy. Thor was next to me, still alert, his hair goosebumps. When I hung up, I heard a snack coming from the closet, as if someone had suddenly closed a box. I almost lost my voice of fright. I ran to the living room, closed the hallway door, and left the dog inside so he wouldn't enter. I tried to rationalize. I thought it could be the wind, but the house was locked, and there was no wind inside. I spent a while trying to convince myself that it was just my head playing tricks, that tiredness was making me paranoid. But suddenly my vibrating cell phone took me out of that thought. It was a message from the family group. Someone asked if I was at home, and another person wrote that he saw a shadow in the hallway, behind me, on the last video call I had made. The worst thing is that I hadn't made any calls. The heart accelerated again, and I realized that this story was not going to end so easily. Even today, I can't explain what was there in that ajar door, nor who or what that shadow was. After that message, I couldn't be alone in the house anymore. I took Thor on my lap and started walking around the house, turning on all the lights. I tried to look for cameras around the house, but I don't have any installed, so I was completely in the dark about what could be happening. The corridor was still closed, but every time I passed near the closet, I felt a strange pressure in my chest, as if I were being watched. The dog was still restless, growling at the door, as if he had noticed something I couldn't see. That night, I couldn't sleep properly. I stayed up late, trying to convince myself that it had a logical explanation. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that door ajar and felt the smell of wet earth, even with everything dry in the house. The next day, I went out to buy a padlock for the closet and called a friend to stay with me. Still, we couldn't figure out how the clay marks appeared inside. To this day, Thor doesn't even want to pass near that corridor, and I keep wondering, what was hidden there in that half-open door? In the days that followed, I began to notice small details that I didn't notice before. Sometimes, when I was in the kitchen, I smelled a smell of fresh earth, as if someone had just stepped in there. My dog was still suspicious, sometimes staring at the corridor, as if he was trying to identify something that only he could see. I decided that I was no longer going to ignore what was happening, so I put an improvised camera to record the closet during the night. The next morning, I reviewed the images and didn't believe what I saw. For several minutes, the closet door opened by itself slowly, as if something or someone was touching it. No one appeared visible in the recording, only the door moving. My heart raced, and the feeling of fear intensified. I decided to lock the closet with a padlock and not open it anymore, but that doubt, that fear were still with me. I wonder what was in there, and why did my dog know this before me? After that, I tried to keep my normal routine, but I could never look at that corridor the same way. Whenever I pass by the closet, I feel a strange chill, as if something was watching me. My dog, who has always been calm, is alert and sometimes barks into nothingness. I even tried to talk to my family about it, but they think I'm exaggerating or getting paranoid. I just know that all that happened to me, and to this day I can't explain it properly. So far, nothing else has happened, but I can't get rid of that uncomfortable feeling. Sometimes at night, I wake up thinking I hear a door creaking, a very light movement, almost imperceptible, coming from that closet. I've thought about calling someone to take a look, but deep down I'm afraid of what they might find. I think this story will stay with me for a long time, because it still doesn't make sense, and the fear is still here. Has anyone ever been through something similar to an object or place in the house that seemed alive? And you, have you ever had any strange experience at home that you still can't explain? Tell us in the comments. I always order food through the app, especially on days when I'm exhausted and don't have the patience to cook. On that rainy night, after a hard day of remote work, I just wanted to eat something quick and throw myself on the couch. I ordered a snack through the usual app, paid online and waited. I turned on the TV and left my cell phone nearby to follow the delivery. About 40 minutes later, I receive a message from the delivery man warning that I had left the order at the door. I was strange because I didn't hear a bell or a knock, but with the noise of the heavy rain, I thought it had gone unnoticed. I got up to get the snack, a little sleepy. When I opened the door, I got scared. Neither the order, nor the bag, nothing. But that wasn't what made me cold. It was the wet entrance carpet with footprints. Wet tennis footprints going inside the door. My heart shot at the time. I locked the door quickly and started looking around. I tried to think if I could have wet the carpet myself before, but no. I hadn't even left the house that night. And another thing made me even more nervous. The door was not locked. And I always lock it up. I slowly went back inside, trying to remember if I had really locked the door when I got home from work. But I clearly remembered the noise of the key turning. It's an automatic habit. I tried to rationalize, convince myself that I must be too tired and forgot. But those wet footprints, they weren't there before. They were fresh, with the clay still wet and sharp on the carpet. I took my cell phone to send a message to the delivery man, ask if he was sure he left the order at my door. He visualized but didn't answer. After a few minutes, the delivery photo disappeared from the chat, as if it had been deleted. At this point, my head was already 1,000. I was following the footprints that went from the carpet to the beginning of the corridor that gives access to the rooms. But there at the beginning of the corridor, they simply stood. Nothing on the floor. No continuation. No brand coming back. As if the person had disappeared right there. I stood still watching for a few seconds, feeling my stomach turn. I thought about calling the police, but what was I going to say? Hi, I think someone came in here, but I'm not sure. There's only a few footprints and the food disappeared. Even so, I decided to take a knife from the kitchen and start checking all the rooms, one by one. I opened the bathroom door first, turned on the light with my hands still shaking. Everything in place. Towel hanging, brush in the glass, nothing strange at first glance. I went to the guest room, which I rarely use. Closed door. I turned the handle very slowly and pushed it with my foot, just to ensure a minimum distance in case there was someone inside. It was empty too, but the smell had a strong smell of wet earth, as if someone had passed there with rain-stained clothes. But it hasn't rained for days. I stood there trying to understand, my heart beating so loud that it seemed to fill the silence of the whole house. The last door was that of my room. And that's when I realized something else. The living room window was ajar. And I would never leave that open. I have a habit of locking everything, even the bathroom window. I came back, closed the window, and tried to remember if someone in the building had access to my key, but it didn't make sense. I had just arrived, ordered the food, and in less than 15 minutes, it all happened. I went back to the entrance carpet and noticed something I hadn't seen before. Right next to the footprints, there was a small, folded paper. I took it carefully. It was the napkin of a restaurant, but with a single word written with a blue pen. Thank you. At the time I froze. I kept looking at that napkin, as if it was going to explode. It wasn't the restaurant of the order I had made. The name on paper was from a totally different place, and worse, it had closed more than 2 years ago. I remember because it was close to the old work, and I sometimes had lunch there. I tried to think of some rational explanation. Maybe someone dropped it by mistake. Maybe it was exchanged by some delivery man. But what about the unlocked door? And the wet footprints? And the smell of earth in the room? That was all wrong. Every little thing seemed isolated, but when put together, they formed something much worse. I went back to my room, already with my cell phone in my hand. I locked all the doors again, checked every window, and even pushed a dresser against the front door. I sat on the bed with the lights on, without the courage to close my eye. In the delivery app, the delivery man's message was still there, with the location marked exactly on my door, but there was no image as it usually has. I sent a message back asking if he had really left the food here, but I didn't get an answer. A few minutes later, his name simply disappeared from the chat, as if the profile had never existed. I tried to call the number that appeared in the order, but it said it was unavailable. I started looking for the delivery man's name on Google, on social networks, anywhere, but nothing appeared. The most bizarre thing is that, when I went to review the history of my orders in the app, this specific request was simply no longer there, as if it had never been done. But I had the receipt in my email. I had the notification on my cell phone. Something had happened, and it wasn't something in my head. The worst feeling was not knowing if all that was just a strange system error, or if there was someone messing with my head on purpose. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept listening to every little crash of the house, every creak on the floor, with my heart beating in my neck. And every time I started to doze off, I remembered the unlocked door, the footprint trail, and the napkin of a restaurant that theoretically didn't even exist anymore. I spent the whole night on alert. In the morning, when the sun finally started to come out, I took courage and went to look at the door carpet again. The footprints had dried up, but you could see the mark well. It happened. That really happened. Until today, I never got an explanation that made sense to me. If you were in this situation, would you open the door or call the police right away?